It's a murder on the dance floor. But you better not kill the groove, DJ. Gonna burn this goddamn house right down. I know.
A few years back, I worked part-time covering as a karaoke host at a local bar. I've had a few run-ins with drunken idiots, but this one was by far the scariest. I'd only been working there about 3 weeks at this point. Prior to me, it had been 3 different girls hosting, so I was the first guy. While training, they warned me if I ever felt uncomfortable to call for security. I immediately took that as guys getting too handsy with the girls, so I figured I wouldn't have any issues since I was the first guy here. I quickly learned that the difference for me would be that people tend to get more aggressive with a guy than with a girl. So it was a Saturday night and I was hosting. It was about 1 a.m. and almost everyone in the bar was drunk, and karaoke had been going pretty smoothly. So I call someone up, and he says he wants to sing Zombie by the Cranberries. Problem is, someone sang it like 40 minutes earlier, and one of the few rules we have is no repeat songs. He immediately starts ignoring me telling him this and just keeps repeating that he wants to sing that song. Finally, I get his attention and explain to him that he can't, it just isn't happening. He immediately steps to within about 6 inches of me and says, "You're gonna let me sing that effing song." He then turns away and starts talking into the mic. I tell him one more time, either you sing something else or you don't sing. He then tells me to kill myself and starts ranting about it into the microphone. He was a weird guy. He looked like he'd been crying and he was quite drunk. So now I'm actually mad. I turn his mic all the way down, turn mine all the way up, and call for security. One of the bartenders immediately starts coming towards the stage, and the guy turns to get in my face again. Now, this is where it gets kind of silly. I'm like 5 feet 11 inches and 160 pounds, not a huge guy by any stretch of the imagination. The guy giving me shit is a good 3 inches taller than me and about the same build. The bartender, on the other hand, is about 6 feet 2 inches and 230 pounds with a massive beard and does kickboxing for fun. He's jacked and scary. He gets in the guy's face and the guy immediately steps back and starts talking about how he's so self-conscious about his singing and it's the only song he loves, but he understands the rules and just misunderstood me. It was kind of funny how quickly he backed down. He asked me one more time to let him sing that song and told me it was his girlfriend's favorite. I told him we just can't do it, but I'd let him choose another song. He took some time before finally choosing Rage Against the Machine. The one that explicitly says, "I won't do what you tell me." As the bartender is walking away, the drunk guy says into the microphone, "This song is about fighting against tyrants." My coworker immediately does a 180 and gets about 5 feet away from him and says, "If the next words out of your mouth are words to that song, I'm going to throw you out." Something in him snapped at this point. He picked up the microphone, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I'm going to sing that song tonight." The bartender immediately grabbed him and threw him out of the club. He came back over to me and apologized, but I wasn't bothered at all. I honestly thought the guy would just sing along to the second song choice. The lyrics are literally, "F you, I won't do what you tell me." It would have been more entertaining. We never really had too many issues at this club, so security wasn't exactly tight. The night went on, a few more groups came up to sing different songs, and I'd completely forgotten about the emotional drunk. It must have been about an hour later when suddenly I see a bit of commotion at the entrance. The bartender is blocking someone's path and clearly gesturing for them to leave. I obviously couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see that he was getting physical with someone. That's when things took a turn. The sound was unmistakable. I saw the bartender fall down onto the floor almost immediately, and people around him started panicking. As he fell, I saw the man he was arguing with. It was the emotional drunk guy from earlier. I was positioned in a cramped little hut with a DJ deck, and the only way out was the doorway directly facing him, so I just crouched down and tried peeking through a gap. I watched in terror as he walked straight towards me. He aimed the gun directly at my face, and with tears in his eyes, he demanded I play Zombie by the Cranberries. I started to talk, about to beg for my life, when he interrupted and said, "I don't care about the stupid rule." Like he thought I was going to mention the repeated song rule with a gun pointed at me. "Please. Just do it. I have nothing against you." I agreed to his request and told him I was finding the song. He grabbed the microphone and got into position in the middle of the dance floor. I pressed play and he immediately closed his eyes and looked up, patiently waiting for the intro of the song to end. He starts singing, and I hate to say it, but he was pretty good. He was putting raw emotion into his singing. He was using his arms a lot to gesture, which meant that the gun was pointing all over and I was constantly flinching. Practically everybody had ran out of the club at this point, and I was still trapped in my stupid DJ hut. I think I was too scared to move, but also completely struck by the bizarre experience. As the lyric portion of the song came to an end, he started to look around. I felt a flush go through my whole body as I realized what was about to happen. He looked down at the gun, then towards the bartender on the floor, then back at me. "I'm so sorry." His first shot missed me, as far as I could tell. I immediately started to sprint out of my hut. I had a million thoughts racing through my head as I anticipated his next shot in my back. I'd heard stories about people not realizing they'd been shot because of the adrenaline. I was convinced I was bleeding out and about to collapse. I was running so fast, wondering why I wasn't dead yet. I jumped over the bartender's dead body and made it out of the front door. The crowd screamed when I burst out, and I had cops pointing their guns at me, ordering me to get down. I was alive. But why? After the cops clarified who I was, they pushed in and went to clear the club. It turns out he didn't shoot at me. He shot himself. Straight in the head. Looking back, I think I understand his apology now. He never wanted to kill the bartender, he just wanted to sing that song one last time, and he was the one person in his way. Over the next few weeks we learned more about this guy. His girlfriend had just died and it broke him. They were apparently regulars at the club, and that was their favorite song. I'm not sure if he'd planned on killing himself that night or if the confrontation led him to think it was a good idea, but the whole thing was so messed up. The club shut down after that incident. Nobody wanted to go there anymore, and rumors started that the place was haunted. I moved on to other things and try not to think about it too much. It gave me a new appreciation for life, even if that song gives me panic attacks. Every like and comment really helps the channel. Can we get 100 likes? Thank you. This all happened just recently, in summer this year. I'd been living with my parents until I had a good enough job to move out. About 9 months ago, I was finally ready to leave the nest. The place I found wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but it wasn't too bad. Some of my neighbors actually came over to welcome me and gave me some food. There was one neighbor though, the guy who lived to the right of me, who wasn't exactly welcoming, but immediately comfortable with me like we'd known each other for a long time. He'd see me leaving for work in the morning and run out of his house to tell me random stories, like how the last neighbor used to always turn the bathroom light on at 3 a.m. and leave it on all night. Or that they would sunbathe in the garden for 5 hours sometimes. It was all very random, boring facts, and I'd barely get a chance to react to his stories before he was asking me intrusive questions. Like, why did you leave for 83 minutes last night? It's worth noting that his voice was a bit odd. He spoke with a very particular inflection every time he'd say something. Like an enthusiastic nerd, if that makes sense. Sometimes it made his statements sound like accusations, and sometimes it made them sound like questions, but my response to his comments were never really met with conversation. I would kind of laugh it off and just give him a short answer, like, I had to grab some groceries for tomorrow. But he'd be really quick to interrupt and remind me that the last neighbor never took 83 minutes to grab groceries. And he'd say it with an almost accusatory tone, like what I was saying was ridiculous. I assumed he was just a bit odd and didn't call him out on his intrusive questions too much. This continued for weeks. He'd either run out to come and question me about my day-to-day activity, or he'd come knocking at random hours to tell me facts about my life. He would tell me that he noticed that I left at 8:33 this morning instead of the usual 8:26. I had different ways of reacting to this, sometimes thanking him for letting me know, sometimes being rather dismissive, but always friendly. He was never interested in any other kind of conversation. He'd tell me his observations and then leave. The months went by, and his behavior continued. Almost every day he'd stop me in the morning or come knocking to tell me something about his observations. He seemed harmless, so I just let him do his thing. One evening while I was going for drinks across the road, I asked my neighbor if she ever had any issues with him. She paused almost immediately and looked at me with a serious expression. What happened? She seemed really worried when she asked me. I explained to her that he would approach me constantly to tell me that he'd seen me turning on specific lights in the house at night, or that he'd point out changes in my usual routine. Nothing terrifying, but still creepy. At this point, she turned the music off and put her glass down. You need to be careful around him. She seemed disturbed, like I triggered a repressed memory. The people who lived in that house before you were so sweet. I can't prove it, but I know that they're gone because of him. Gone? What did she mean gone? I pushed her to tell me more, but she apologized and turned the music back on and changed the subject, ending the conversation. She did stop at one point to just make sure I locked my doors and not to invite him in at any point. That night, as I made my way back home, I watched his house closely as I crossed the road. It was noticeably dark. I never really paid it much attention, but I don't think I ever saw his lights on after dark. Whereas every other house on the street had at least a few lights in different rooms. I got to my door and paused. I looked towards his house one more time. I saw exactly what I was hoping not to. A glimpse of light. He was peeking at me. How long had he been watching the neighbor's house to know that I was over there? Was this all he did? Watch me? I went inside and remembered what my neighbors said. How often did I not even think about locking the door? Honestly, I think most nights I wouldn't even check. I clicked the lock and made my way to the back door. I took the key from the side and made sure it was locked. I put the key back in its usual place and made my way upstairs. As I dressed down into my underwear and made my way under my covers, I reached over it and turned off the lamp. It had been a long night, so I started to drift off quite fast. Did I hear that? Was that knocking? I sat on the side of my bed and waited, anticipating more knocks. About a minute passed and I didn't hear any more knocking, so I assumed I just dreamt it as I was half asleep. I lay back onto my bed and closed my eyes once again. No. I definitely heard something. I was in a weird state of being half asleep and a little bit tipsy, so I threw the light on and made my way to the window. I couldn't see anything or anyone outside. The sound of me opening my window was loud enough for any visitor to hear. I called out into the darkness, asking if anyone was there. At this point, any normal person would step into view and show themselves, but nobody reacted. Nothing. I know that someone was knocking. I threw on my dressing gown and made my way downstairs. I went straight to the front door. It had shaded glass that let me see partially through it. There was clearly a figure standing in front of the door. I was freaking out, but I was also angry. I didn't even consider the danger. I started fumbling with the lock and threw the door open.
You left your house for 157 minutes.
What the hell? I snapped. This was the latest he ever visited. Everything about his behavior had really annoyed me. The fact that I called out of the window and he didn't respond, and instead stood with his nose practically touching my front door. Why did you feel the need to tell me that? At this late in the night. I was falling asleep.
You've been out very late.
I know that. I'm an adult. I'm allowed to go out late. I realized I was reacting to his accusatory tone. Is that all? You wanted to tell me I'd been out late? He started to just walk away, back to his house. I yelled to him that I didn't want him to knock on my door again. He didn't react, just kept walking towards his house and went inside. I'd tolerated his weirdness for long enough. I convinced myself I wouldn't let him commentate my life schedule anymore, and that next time he talks to me I was going to tell him I don't care and just keep walking. I closed the door and went straight back to bed, still frustrated with how intrusive and weird he was. I closed my eyes and imagined what I would say to him the next time I saw him. I felt really tired and had no problems getting back to sleep. As expected, I had the weirdest dream. Whenever I'd had a few drinks, I'd always have such vivid dreams. I could hear that damn gentle knocking. I didn't jolt awake this time. I almost convinced my subconscious dream state to ignore the imaginary knocking. But I was fully aware of every creepy little thing that was happening. I started wondering if I'd locked the door. I knew I'd locked it earlier, but did I lock it after I opened it again to confront him? I couldn't remember. I hated how realistic my dreams were. Of all the scenarios I could think about, did I really have to imagine him breaking into my house and walking up my stairs? I feel like I'd never been so consciously aware during any of my dreams. I was dreaming that I was locked in place, sleeping on my side, with my back to the door. His breathing sounded so real. If it wasn't for the alcohol in my system, I would have definitely woken up. This was by far the creepiest dream I'd ever had. I dreamt that he was climbing into bed with me, wrapping his arm around my waist and playing with my hair. I felt absolutely disgusted, but the soft touches also felt relaxing and pushed me deeper into the dream. I was urging myself to wake up at this point. My mind kept racing back to the thought that I actually hadn't locked the door. I needed to get up. His breathing was so intense. It felt so real. His touch felt real. This was unlike any dream I'd ever had. I was urging myself to wake up. I felt paralyzed. Wake up. Wake the hell up. My eyes finally opened and I could still feel his touch.
Why didn't you lock the door?
I jumped up. His voice immediately jolted me awake. He was in my bed. I screamed and ran straight down the stairs and out into the night. I was still screaming as I ran across the road and started banging on my neighbor's door. I was freezing, only wearing my underwear and completely barefoot. I banged aggressively on her door and shouted her name until she came down. She opened the door in a daze and I pushed my way in. I frantically explained what had happened whilst begging her to lock the door and call the police. We watched out of the window. My front door was wide open, just as I'd left it. The cops were on their way and my friend was comforting me as I got into some of her clothes and told her all of the details. Minutes passed as we stared out of that window. My friend asked if I was sure he was there and it wasn't just a bad dream. I started to doubt myself when we didn't see him leaving. I wasn't the sensitive type. I wouldn't make up that whole scenario out of fear. I had a vivid memory of him lying in bed with me, and touching me, and talking to me. It was real. I know it was. The cops showed up after about 15 minutes and started to enter the house, guns drawn. We watched intently, waiting for them to bring him out in cuffs. They were in there for quite a while and I started to think that he'd locked himself in my room or something. After what felt like forever, the cops started to leave my house. They were alone. He wasn't with them. I couldn't believe it. I was not crazy. He was in my house. I know he was. I made my way outside to speak to the cops and ask where he was, but they confirmed that they found nothing and searched everywhere. I frantically told them that I was not going back into that house with him still in there. That's when the worst thing that could have happened. He walked out of his house. He stood there, just watching. I was freaking out, demanding that they arrest him and insisting that he was in my house. His expression didn't change, he didn't even flinch. He just turned and walked back inside. Yes, I was drunk and I was pretty emotional at this point, but I couldn't believe that they didn't listen to me. They told me that they'd searched the entire place and there was no intruder. They said that the person who I claimed was an intruder was clearly in their own home, so I should just go inside and get some sleep. There were no signs of forced entry and no damage or evidence of an intruder, so there was nothing they could do. After a while of me practically begging them to at least go and interview him, one officer did go over and speak to him, but it seemed like a very short conversation. He confirmed that he did come over initially to check on me, as I looked drunk, but then went straight home. I was furious, but also terrified. I eventually went back inside and searched the house for any evidence that he was there. I was almost starting to doubt myself, until I checked the back door. It was unlocked, and the key was still in the door. I never left the key in the door, ever. He'd left through the back whilst I was hiding across the street. He'd been in my house and there was nothing I could do about it. I made my way upstairs after properly locking every door. The sick freak had made my bed. It was perfectly tidy and the covers and pillows were placed perfectly. He didn't even rush out after I woke up. He just tidied my bed and then left through the back door. I climbed in and tried to fall asleep, but there was an overwhelming musky smell. His unwashed body had tainted my covers and his odor lingered all over my room. It took me hours to replace all of my bedding and finally get to sleep. The next morning I couldn't shake the feeling of being violated, but I also doubted the whole night. The police had been inside my house, a bunch of men in heavy uniform. That could explain the smell. The key being in the back door, maybe they were checking to see if it was the right key for that lock, confirming that nobody had stolen it. Even the tiny pillows had an explanation. I told them he was in my bed. So it makes sense that they'd throw my bedding onto the floor if they were looking for him, and then maybe one of them just put it back and tidied it up for me. I followed my usual morning routine, and then at 8:30 as I approached my front door, I took a deep breath, anticipating his presence. I left my house and headed towards the road, looking in his direction as soon as I stepped outside. There he was, walking out of his house to greet me. Like clockwork. I froze and tensed up, ready to scream or punch him if he got too close.
You're running 3 minutes later than usual. Did you remember to lock your door this time?
If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe. I'll start by saying I'm a 21-year-old female university student who lives in a small town in Greece. It's a safe town full of young adults, and I live in a safe area. I've never felt in danger before until that Saturday. 2 weeks ago, I was at a birthday get-together at a restaurant with lots of friends and uni classmates. We were mostly drinking wine, and it was enough to get me tipsy, as I hadn't eaten anything before I came out. After we had dinner and drank, everyone started to leave, and a smaller group of us decided to continue the birthday party and go bar hopping. There were a few of us, the guy who was a designated driver, who was a 21-year-old male, and 3 more girls aged 20 to 21 years old. We went to some bars to dance and ended up in a typical nightclub, all of us tipsy at this point, including the designated driver. But I was the worst of them, getting really dizzy after having more and stronger drinks. After dancing for a couple of hours, the drunken feeling only got worse, so I decided to go home. I told the group that I was leaving, and they suggested walking with me. But my house is half an hour away from where the club was, and I didn't want to make anyone walk all the way there and back. Anyway, the designated driver didn't seem well enough to drive. I could feel that I wasn't exactly walking straight, but I had a sense of my surroundings and knew this road like the back of my hand. It was about 3 in the morning, so there were still people outside returning from bars themselves. I was around 15 minutes away from my house, walking past the takeaway place that was open 24/7 when I heard a guy yell, "Hey, sweetheart, don't go. I just want to talk." Since I was the only female walking on this road at this hour, I realized he must have been talking to me. I tried to take a quick look behind me and saw a tall guy in an Adidas tracksuit with a hood over his head. He was walking quickly towards me. I felt an adrenaline rush and began to walk fast. I tried to get past my drunken state and think clearly. My house was in a dark area, and I had to walk through a dark corner behind a grocery store to get there. I'm a sucker for true crime and horror movies, and this felt like a real horror story coming to life. I heard him yelling at me one more time. He was saying that he only wanted to talk, but I had no intentions of stopping. I took my cell phone out of my jacket and pretended to be on the phone, hoping this would sway him off. 5 to 10 minutes later, I stopped hearing footsteps, so I put my phone back in my pocket and let down my guard. I assumed he probably got bored and left. As I was walking, I suddenly heard his voice again, and this time he wasn't far behind me. He was walking right next to me. I felt cold sweat all over my body. "Why are you running away?" he asked. "You're so beautiful. I just wanted to talk to you." He had a thick African accent. We'd been warned by the university about people that had recently illegally come across the border. I said nothing and started to walk faster. He seemed around my age and had a cigarette hanging from his mouth. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he asked. "Yes, sorry." I thought that if I lied and said I was dating someone, he would stop harassing me and go away. "That sucks," he said. "He must be a lucky guy. Can I have your number? I'd love to be with you." "No thanks," I replied. "This is creeping me out, honestly." He started laughing. "I won't hurt you. I am very friendly." He stretched his hand out to me to shake my hand. I reluctantly shook it and immediately knew I'd made a mistake. He pulled me in and started to hug me. He was telling me I smell so good and I am so beautiful. I tried to pull away, but he was really strong and I was still pretty drunk. He announced to me that he will make a very good boyfriend and he will come home with me. I was in complete panic, but I knew I had to say something to get him off me. He was holding me tight for minutes, his hands were exploring my body, and I was regretting every decision that led me here. I told him I was cold and we should go to my house. He let go of me and excitedly agreed. I was only 5 minutes away from where my roommate was sleeping. I had completely sobered up at this point and was thinking about every option in vivid detail. I decided to run. I was so lucky to be wearing my flat shoes and not my heels, which I usually wore every night. I ran so fast, not even looking back. I heard him shouting, but I couldn't understand him. I turned a corner and he'd lost me. I kept running the whole 5 minutes back. I wasn't taking any risks. I got home and immediately locked the door behind me and just collapsed, completely exhausted. I started crying and just wept against the front door for a good few minutes. My friend came downstairs and found me, and I explained what had happened. Nothing came of it afterwards, and I stupidly didn't call the police, but we did make sure that our designated driver in the future wasn't allowed to drink.